You know, some stories feel like they belong in a movie, a grand epic with heroes and villains, but I swear, every word I'm about to tell you is as real as the calluses on my hands and the ache in my bones. It's a story about a quiet life turned upside down, about how the very foundation of my world was ripped out from under me, and how, at an age when most folks are settling into their recliners, I found myself in a war. The day Mayor Thorne betrayed us, I saw it in his eyes, not just the usual political bluster, but a glint of something truly monstrous. He stood there, on the very ground we'd poured our hearts into, and with a smile as slick as oil, he condemned everything we held dear. That's when I knew he wouldn't just take our community, he intended to break us, piece by agonizing piece, and he started with me. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Arthur Finch. For 69 years, Willow Creek, New York, had been my entire world. It's a postcard town, nestled in the rolling hills upstate, just a few hours north of the city. We've got a historic Main Street, a lazy river winding through it, and the kind of community where everyone knows your name, your grandfather's name, and probably what you had for breakfast last Tuesday. My grandfather helped lay the bricks for the old town hall, my father ran the hardware store for 50 years, and I was the town's carpenter. Built half the porches on Elm Street, fixed more leaky roofs than I can count, and handcrafted the altar for our little community church. Willow Creek wasn't just a place, it was an extension of my family. Especially after my Eleanor passed. We never had kids, and when she left me 7 years ago, it felt like the color drained out of everything. The silence in our old Victorian house, usually filled with her humming and the clatter of her gardening tools, became a heavy, suffocating blanket. I thought that was the worst grief I'd ever know. I was wrong. My solace, my anchor, became the Willow Creek Community Garden. It wasn't much when Eleanor and I started it over 40 years ago, just a neglected patch of municipal land behind the old library. But with shovels and sweat, we turned it into a vibrant mosaic of tomatoes, squash, zinnias, and marigolds. After Eleanor died, I expanded it, built new raised beds, put in a small stone fountain she'd always wanted. It became a hub. Kids from the elementary school had their own plots, the senior center hosted weekly potlucks there, and every Saturday, the farmers' market spilled out into its paths. It was a place of growth, of sharing, of quiet beauty. It was Eleanor's legacy, and by extension, mine. Then came Robert Thorne. Thorne wasn't from Willow Creek. He blew in about 10 years ago, a slick-haired real estate developer from some suburb downstate, all sharp suits and even sharper teeth. He bought up a few properties, flipped them for a tidy profit, and then, inexplicably, decided to run for mayor. Willow Creek had always elected its own, the local grocer, the retired school principal, steady hands who understood the rhythm of our town. Thorne was different. He promised progress, modernization, economic revitalization. His campaign was a whirlwind of glossy brochures and perfectly timed sound bites. He spoke of bringing in new businesses, boosting tourism, putting Willow Creek on the map. Some of the younger folks, those who'd felt a bit overlooked by the sleepy pace of our town, were taken by his energy. Even I, in my quiet way, found myself nodding along to some of his speeches, thinking maybe a little fresh air wouldn't hurt. He had a way of looking you right in the eye, making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He talked about preserving our heritage even as he spoke of forward momentum. It was a delicate dance, and he was a master choreographer. He won. Not by a landslide, but enough. His first term was, by Willow Creek standards, tumultuous. He pushed through zoning changes that favored big box stores over local businesses, privatized some public services, and started an ill-advised festival that ended up costing the town more than it made. But he was charismatic, and when he looked at you, he still made you feel like you were part of his vision. He'd even stopped by the community garden once, shaking my hand, complimenting the heirloom tomatoes. "Arthur," he'd said, "this is what makes Willow Creek special. This kind of grassroots spirit. We need to protect that." I'd believed him. Foolishly. His second term was when the mask began to slip. The talk of progress became more aggressive, less about balanced growth and more about unchecked development. Whispers started circulating, rumors of backroom deals, of properties mysteriously changing hands right before major rezonings, of contractors with ties to Thorn getting all the big municipal jobs. But still, he kept a tight grip. He controlled the narrative, charming the local paper, silencing dissent with a smile and a well-placed donation. The first direct threat to my world came subtly. It was a notice tacked to the old library's bulletin board, announcing a public meeting to discuss future development opportunities for the municipal land adjacent to the Willow Creek Public Library. My heart gave a little lurch. That was our land. The community garden. I went to the meeting. The town hall was packed, mostly with Thorne's supporters, people who saw dollar signs in his promises. He stood at the podium, radiating confidence, a projector screen behind him displaying sleek architectural renderings. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "Willow Creek is on the cusp of a new era. We have an opportunity, a truly unique opportunity, to bring prosperity and prestige to our beloved town." He then unveiled his plan, the Willow Creek Luxury Residences. A multi-story condominium complex, complete with a rooftop pool, private parking, and high-end retail spaces on the ground floor. And the location? Directly on top of the community garden. A gasp rippled through the room. Mine was silent, caught in my throat. I looked at the shimmering, glass and steel monstrosity on the screen, then back at Thorne, whose smile never wavered. He spoke of tax revenues, of attracting affluent residents, of modernizing the heart of our downtown. He even had the gall to say, "And as for the little garden, well, we'll relocate it to a smaller, more manageable plot, perhaps on the outskirts of town." A symbolic gesture, of course. A symbolic gesture. He might as well have spat on Eleanor's grave. I stood up, my voice trembling slightly. "Mayor Thorne," I said, "that garden isn't just a little garden. It's 40 years of hard work. It's a community hub. It's where our children learn, where our seniors gather. It's a place of memory, of healing." He cut me off, still smiling, but his eyes held a flicker of impatience. "Arthur, I respect your sentiment, I truly do. You've done wonderful work there. But we have to look to the future. Progress, Arthur, progress demands sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" I retorted, my voice gaining strength. "Whose sacrifices? Yours, Mayor? Or ours?" A murmur went through the room. Some people looked away. Thorne's gaze hardened for a fraction of a second, then softened into a paternalistic stare. "Arthur, I understand you're emotional. This is a big change. But this project is for the good of the entire town, not just a select few." He had twisted it. Made me sound selfish. The very man who claimed to protect our heritage was now trampling it underfoot for his own gain. I tried to rally the garden members, the seniors, the parents whose kids loved their little plots. We started a petition. We wrote letters to the editor. We even held a peaceful protest outside town hall. Thorne responded with calculated cruelty. He used his influence to get our letters buried, replaced with glowing editorials about the Thorne vision. He sent town inspectors to the garden, citing minor, fabricated code violations. He even managed to get some of the younger members, whose businesses relied on town permits, to withdraw their support, their faces etched with fear. He isolated me. Made me feel like an old man clinging to a bygone era, an obstacle to inevitable progress. Then came the final blow, 2 weeks later. I was at the garden, tending to the last of the autumn squash, the air crisp and carrying the scent of turning leaves. A town vehicle pulled up, and out stepped a burly man in a hard hat, flanked by 2 police officers. "Mr. Finch," he said, clipboard in hand. "We have a demolition order for this site. Work begins tomorrow at dawn." My breath caught. Tomorrow? But the appeal hasn't even been heard yet. We had an emergency hearing scheduled for the following week. Mayor Thorne expedited the order, Mr. Finch, one of the officers said, his voice flat. It's all legal. Signed and sealed. I stared at the demolition man, then at the officers, then back at my garden. The vibrant greens and oranges, the sturdy rows of herbs, the little stone fountain gurgling softly. My sanctuary. Eleanor's memory. All of it. You can't, I whispered, the words barely audible. You just can't. The demolition man shrugged. Orders are orders, old-timer. You got till sunset to clear out your personal belongings. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a bitter taste in my mouth. Thorne wasn't just taking the garden, he was rubbing my face in his victory. He was proving that I, Arthur Finch, was nothing. An old man, easily silenced, easily crushed. I watched them plant their orange construction cones, marking the boundaries of destruction, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that this wasn't just about a garden anymore. This was about a man who thought he could steal a piece of my soul and get away with it. And as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, I knew I couldn't let him. I couldn't. The air bit colder now, the kind of deep chill that sinks into your bones and lingers long after the sun has set. It was late autumn in Willow Creek, and the vibrant tapestry of the community garden had been ripped to shreds. Where once stood rows of heirloom tomatoes and fragrant basil, now lay a scarred expanse of churned earth, littered with the broken remnants of my life. The little stone fountain, Eleanor's dream, was a heap of fractured rock. The raised beds, splintered wood. The laughter of children, the quiet chatter of seniors, replaced by the incessant drone of heavy machinery, the mournful groan of bulldozers. I stood there, day after day, a silent sentinel, watching them tear it apart. Not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a grim necessity. I needed to imprint every detail of this destruction onto my mind, to feel the sharp edge of its injustice until it became a part of me, a fuel for the fire that was beginning to burn. The initial shock, the trembling vulnerability, had calcified into something hard and unyielding. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was a sharpening stone, honing my resolve. Thorne, in his arrogant haste, had underestimated an old man's patience. He thought he'd crushed me, reduced me to a whimper. He saw a carpenter, a man of wood and nails, easily dismissed. He didn't see the deep roots I had in this town, the stories etched into every beam, every foundation, every deed. He didn't understand that a carpenter doesn't just build, he understands structure, weakness, leverage. And he certainly didn't understand that sometimes, the quietest men harbor the loudest storms. My old Victorian house, now more silent than ever, became my war room. I dusted off old land deeds from my grandfather's time, town planning documents, geological surveys from the municipal archives dating back to the 50s. My father, a meticulous man, had kept records of every property he'd ever worked on, every permit pulled, every inspection passed. I spread them out on Eleanor's antique dining table, the scent of dust and old paper filling the room. My hands, callous from a lifetime of labor, now traced lines on maps, highlighted dates, cross-referenced names. Thorne's project, the Willow Creek Luxury Residences, was already rising from the ashes of my garden. A monstrous skeleton of steel and concrete, it clawed its way into the Willow Creek sky, a defiant monument to his greed. I watched its progress like a hawk, not just from my porch, but from every angle. I spent hours at the public library, ostensibly reading the paper, but really studying the City Planning Commission reports, the environmental impact statements. I went to town hall meetings, not to speak, but to listen, to observe, to pick up on the subtle cues, the nervous glances, the veiled references. My focus wasn't on stopping the construction. It was too late for that. My focus was on making sure that when it finally stood, it would be Thorne's undoing. I knew Thorne cut corners. It was his modus operandi. He was a developer, not a craftsman. Profit was his only blueprint. And the faster the profit, the better. The key, I realized, lay buried deep beneath the very ground he was building on. Willow Creek, for all its bucolic charm, sat on a unique geological formation. The river, the hills, the surprisingly fertile soil of the garden, it was all part of a specific, ancient aquifer system. My grandfather, a man who built stone foundations to last 1,000 years, had always warned about building heavy structures too close to the river's fluctuating water table. He'd even sketched out detailed maps, noting areas of particular instability, places where natural springs bubbled up seasonally, where the ground shifted imperceptibly with the changing water levels. These maps, carefully preserved in my father's old carpentry chest, became my Bible. I found the smoking gun in a series of obscure, decades-old geological surveys tucked away in a dusty town archive box. Thorne's construction firm, Thorne Development Group, had filed their own, much more recent, surveys. They conveniently dismissed the older findings, declaring the land perfectly stable. But I knew, from the historical records and my grandfather's meticulous notes, that Thorne's surveys were either deliberately flawed or outright fabricated. He had ignored the warnings, bribed or coerced the right people, and pushed ahead. The foundation of his luxury residences, I discovered, was built on a lie, directly over one of the most historically unstable sections of the aquifer, a section prone to seasonal subsidence. But mere evidence wasn't enough. Thorne controlled the narrative, the press, even some of the local judiciary. I needed a public, irrefutable act of exposure, timed to perfection. The grand unveiling of the Willow Creek luxury residences was set for early spring. Thorne had sent out lavish invitations, promising a new era for Willow Creek. He planned to host a ribbon-cutting ceremony on the rooftop terrace, a symbol of his triumph, overlooking the entire town. It was to be his coronation. And I would be there. My carpentry skills, once used to build and repair, were now repurposed. I spent weeks in my workshop, meticulously crafting replicas of the old geological maps, cross-referencing them with Thorne's falsified reports. I even managed to obtain, through a friendly contact in the state environmental agency, a former garden member whose daughter I'd taught to plant marigolds, a copy of a suppressed internal memo warning of potential structural risks on the Willow Creek site. I built a custom display board, a work of art in itself, designed to hold these documents, to tell the undeniable story. My disguise was simple, an old man, a familiar face in Willow Creek. I wore my Sunday best, a slightly worn tweed jacket, and my kindest, most unassuming smile. I'd RSVP'd to the event. Surprisingly, Thorne's office had sent an invitation to all prominent Willow Creek residents, a cynical gesture of outreach. The day of the unveiling dawned crisp and clear, a false promise of new beginnings. The rooftop terrace of the luxury residences glittered under the spring sun. A brass band played cheerful tunes. Champagne flutes clinked. Local dignitaries, city council members, and wealthy potential buyers mingled, all basking in Thorne's carefully curated glow. He stood at the podium, impeccably dressed, a smug, triumphant grin plastered across his face. Friends, neighbors, esteemed guests, Thorne's voice boomed, amplified by the sound system. Welcome to the future of Willow Creek. Welcome to the Willow Creek luxury residences. He gestured grandly to the sprawling view, then to the building itself. This magnificent structure, he continued, stands as a testament to progress, to vision, to what can be achieved when we dare to dream big. Some naysayers, some traditionalists, tried to hold us back. They clung to the past, to sentimentality. But we pushed forward. And here we are, atop the pinnacle of Willow Creek, ready to usher in an era of prosperity for all. His eyes swept over the crowd, lingering for a moment on me, a flicker of dismissive recognition. He probably thought I was there to witness his triumph, to finally accept my defeat. He couldn't have been more wrong. As he paused for applause, I made my move. I had positioned myself near the back of the elevated stage, close to an emergency exit, but also near a large, ornate potted plant. With a practiced, fluid motion, I lifted my carefully constructed display board, concealed until now beneath a heavy coat, and set it firmly on the podium, directly in front of Thorne. The documents, protected by clear acrylic, were stark. On one side, my grandfather's hand-drawn aquifer maps, annotated with warning symbols. On the other, Thorne's falsified geological survey, juxtaposed with the suppressed environmental memo. A large, bold headline I'd printed read, "Thorn builds on lies, Willow Creek's foundation is at risk." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Thorn's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of shock and then pure, unadulterated fury. His mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. "Mayor Thorn," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone I'd leaned into. My hands, surprisingly, didn't shake. "You talk about foundations. But what kind of foundation did you truly build here?" People turned, confused, then their eyes fell on the board. Whispers erupted, growing louder. The camera crews, hired by Thorn for the event, swung their lenses toward me, then to the damning evidence on the display. "You speak of progress," I continued, my gaze fixed on Thorn, whose face was now beet red, "but you built on deception. You ignored decades of geological data, suppressed environmental reports, and jeopardized not just this structure, but the very stability of our town's water table, all for a quick profit." A few of Thorn's cronies started to move, but the sheer unexpectedness of it, the undeniable visual proof, froze them. The press, sensing a scandal, began to clamor. This land, I swept my hand over the display, my garden, Eleanor's garden, was a community sanctuary. You called it sentimentality. But it was also a protective barrier, a natural sponge for the very aquifer you've now threatened with thousands of tons of concrete. I pointed to the suppressed memo. "This report, buried by your office, clearly warned of the risks of significant subsidence if proper, costly, foundational measures weren't taken. Measures you clearly ignored." Thorn finally found his voice, a choked bellow. "This is slander. This man is a lunatic. A disgruntled old fool." He lunged for the display board, but I anticipated him, stepping back and pulling it just out of his reach. "A fool?" I asked, my voice edged with steel. "Or a man who remembers what this town truly stands on? Not your empty promises, Mayor, but the very earth beneath our feet. And you, sir, have proven you don't care if that earth gives way." The buzz intensified. The state environmental official, the one who'd helped me, was in the crowd, having arrived discreetly. He stepped forward, holding up his own copy of the suppressed memo, confirming its authenticity. A reporter from the Albany Times-Union, whom I had quietly tipped off days ago, began shouting questions at Thorn, holding up a printout of my grandfather's maps. The carefully constructed facade of Thorn's triumph shattered. The elegant unveiling devolved into chaos. Thorn's face, once slick with confidence, was now contorted with panic and rage. He was trapped, cornered, his lies exposed for all the world to see, broadcast live by the very media he'd hoped to impress. Within hours, the news exploded. The suppressed reports, the geological inconsistencies, the allegations of bribery and land fraud, it all came tumbling out. The state attorney general launched an immediate investigation. The structural integrity of the Willow Creek luxury residences was called into question, leading to a freeze on sales and a panicked evacuation of the few early residents. Thorn's investors pulled out. His political allies, sensing a sinking ship, deserted him. His carefully cultivated image, his entire empire, began to crumble around him. I watched it unfold from a quiet corner of my living room, the evening news anchors dissecting his downfall. I felt no exultation, no wild cheers. Just a profound, bone-deep stillness. The fire that had burned within me had consumed its fuel. Thorn was destroyed, not by violence, but by the cold, hard facts of his own avarice, exposed by the very ground he had tried to exploit. The luxury residences, now a hollow symbol of Thorn's hubris, stood half-empty, entangled in lawsuits and environmental remediation efforts. It was a stark reminder of what happens when greed trumps community. Willow Creek began the slow, painful process of healing. The new mayor, elected in a special election, was a local woman, a retired teacher, who promised transparency and respect for the town's heritage. There was talk of tearing down Thorn's monstrosity, of perhaps even restoring a portion of the garden. I didn't participate in the town meetings anymore, not directly. My work was done. I still walked through what remained of the old garden site, the earth still raw and scarred. But I saw something else now too. Not just the ghosts of what was lost, but the faint, undeniable promise of what could be, if someone cared enough to nurture it again. My journey from a vulnerable old man to a relentless force of justice had changed me. The quiet carpenter was still there, but he was forged in a crucible of loss and vengeance. I had learned that some battles aren't fought with fists, but with patience, knowledge, and an unshakable resolve to uncover the truth. The chilling part, I suppose, was realizing that I was capable of such a cold, calculated dismantling, that the man who built things could also, if pushed, become the architect of ruin. I still miss Eleanor. Every single day. But now, when I think of her, I don't just feel the pang of loss. I feel the quiet strength she instilled in me, the resilience of the earth she loved. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my soul, that sometimes, justice isn't a blinding flash, but a slow, meticulous unraveling, leaving behind a silence that speaks louder than any scream. The end.